They humiliated me at his family's gala. My husband laughed when his mother refused me a seat at the table. "The help doesn't eat," she hissed. What he forgot was that the mansion, the cars, and his whole company were paid for by my inheritance. That night, I called my lawyer. The next morning, he woke up without a house and without a cent. The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel vibrated with palpable energy, a cacophony of clinking glasses, discreet murmurs, and the intoxicating scent of expensive perfume mingled with barely disguised ambition. It was the night of the annual gala for the Montgomery Family Foundation, the cornerstone event of the social calendar for my husband Blake's family. I stood there, a solitary figure next to an imposing marble column, holding a glass of champagne that had long lost its fizz. Like my spirit, I felt like an exquisite piece of art placed in the wrong room, admirable from a distance, but no one stopped to look closely. My dress, a custom emerald green silk design that had taken weeks to perfect, flowed with fluid elegance that contrasted sharply with the rigidity of my posture in this sea of illustrious surnames and inherited fortunes. I, Natalia Chen, was not recognized here as the award-winning architect or the entrepreneur who had built her own studio from the ground up. I was simply Blake's wife. My own identity, forged with effort and talent, faded under the heavy shadow of his name, Montgomery. Blake stood across the room, the sun in his own solar system, at the center of a circle of older men in bespoke suits that probably cost more than my first car. He was laughing loudly at a joke that, judging by the forced expressions of the others, surely wasn't funny. His eyes, in a quick sweep of the room, met mine. He gave me a fleeting smile, a nervous tick, really, a minimum gesture of acknowledgement before plunging back into his audience. That smile held no warmth. It was a formality, a nod to appearances, a small public bite of attention he expected me to be satisfied with. For 5 long years, I had fed on those crumbs. The voice of Catherine, my mother-in-law, cut through my thoughts like a rusty saw. "Natalia, darling, stop hiding behind that column. People will think you don't appreciate our generosity." Her smile was a thin, sharp line as taut as the cheekbones her cosmetic surgery fought to keep in place. Her blood-red lipstick looked like a warning. She took my arm with surprising strength that belied her frail, skeletal appearance and began to guide, almost drag me toward the main table. It was a long imperial table, a monument to excess, adorned with cascades of white orchids and heavy silver candelabras. "The primary donors here, please," she announced to the room, though her hawk-like gaze was fixed on me. Place cards with names written in impeccable calligraphy gleamed under the candlelight. Montgomery, Ashford, Harrington. At the head, presiding over the table, was Blake's name. Right next to him sat an empty seat. For one stupid, treacherous instant, a bud of hope bloomed in the arid soil of my chest. Maybe tonight, after my considerable anonymous donation to the foundation, they would finally allow me a place. I took a tentative step toward that seat. It was then that Catherine's hand closed on my forearm, this time with the implacable pressure of a vice. "Oh no, dear," she whispered, but her voice carried a metallic timbre designed to project to the curious ears of the nearest guests. "There must be a terrible misunderstanding. This table, as you can see, is for family and the principal benefactors. It is absolutely crucial that we maintain appearances." She paused dramatically, savoring every word, every second of my humiliation. "The support staff and assistants have a wonderful dinner waiting for them in the service area. I'm sure you understand." The world stopped. The murmur of the room didn't fade. It seemed to sharpen. Every conversation felt like a whisper directed at me. I felt the gaze of at least a dozen people pinned to my skin, some with condescending pity, others with morbid, satisfied curiosity. I looked for Blake, my heart beating a desperate, silent plea in my throat. He had seen us. He had heard every venomous syllable. Our eyes met across the sea of flowers and silver. I saw a fraction of a second of panic on his face, the sheer discomfort of being put in the center of such an unpleasant scene. But then something changed. The discomfort dissolved, replaced by an expression it took me a second to recognize. Relief. A crooked smile. Almost a sneer spread across his lips. He shrugged, a minimal, dismissive gesture, as if it were the most innocent prank in the world, and he let out a laugh. It was not a nervous laugh, nor an uncomfortable laugh. It was a short, guttural, cruel laugh that vibrated with barely disguised satisfaction. A laugh that said, "Finally, you're in your place." In front of his friends, in front of his mother, in front of his whole world, my husband laughed at me. My mother and her protocols. "You know how she is," he muttered by way of explanation to the man seated next to him, who diverted his gaze to his plate, visibly embarrassed. That laugh was not a bullet. Bullets are fast. This was slow poison, a chill that spread from the center of my chest to every corner of my being, freezing the blood in my veins, freezing the last vestiges of love I still harbored for him. I did not cry. I did not scream. Those were the reactions they expected, the ones that would have confirmed my weakness. Instead, I raised my chin, met Catherine's icy and triumphant gaze, and offered her a serene, almost beatific smile. "Of course," I said, my voice surprisingly steady and clear. "I understand perfectly." I turned around, feeling the weight of every look on my back, a physical cloak of judgment and disdain. I walked, did not run, toward the grand double doors of the ballroom. Each step was deliberate, every movement controlled. The heel of my shoe marked a funeral rhythm on the polished marble. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. As I crossed the threshold, I heard Catherine's voice resume the conversation as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there. As I was saying, the new hospital wing desperately needs funding. I left behind the sound of her lies, and the image of my husband's laugh burned into my memory. The humiliation no longer hurt. It had transformed, solidified into something harder, colder, sharper. It had become fuel. The silence inside my Mercedes was a sanctuary. I drove aimlessly along the 110 freeway, a river of asphalt suspended over Los Angeles. The city lights blurred, turning into a kaleidoscope of abstract colors through my dry, burning eyes. I wasn't thinking about what had just happened. Analyzing it would be like touching an open wound. Instead, my mind, in an act of self-preservation, opened the doors to a museum only I knew. A somber, silent place where every injury and every contemptuous look was meticulously cataloged. I walked through its empty halls, stopping at each painful exhibit. The first and most sacred was the secret legacy. The scene was vividly illuminated in my memory. Me at 19, sitting in an uncomfortable chair next to my grandfather's hospital bed. The antiseptic smell fought to mask the sickly, sweet scent of his illness. His eyes, though sunken and tired, shone with fierce lucidity. He, a man forged in adversity who had built a small real estate empire from scratch, took my hand. His was rough and trembling. "Natalia, my smart girl," he whispered, his voice a hoarse murmur. "Money can build houses, but not homes. It can buy loyalty, but not love. Listen to me well. I'm going to leave you the tools to build whatever you want, but you have to promise me something." I leaned closer, holding my breath. "Promise me you will never let anyone, not even the man you love, make you feel small. Your value isn't in a bank account. It's here." He tapped my forehead with his bony finger. "And here." His hand moved down to my heart. "Don't let anyone poison it." Days after his funeral, the lawyer, Harold Westbrook, a man whose loyalty to my grandfather was etched in every wrinkle of his face, called me to his solemn office. On the mahogany table, he unfolded the documents that would redefine my life. a trust fund holding hundreds of millions of dollars. My grandfather had left me everything, naming me as the sole administrator, the only one with decision-making power. He saw your intelligence, but above all, he saw your integrity, Harold told me, his eyes kind but serious. He said the rest of the family saw his fortune as a prize at the end of a race, but you saw it as the starting line of yours. He trusted you to grow it, not to squander it. I moved mentally to the next room, one with softer, more deceptive lighting. Early love. There was Blake as I met him in architecture school. Magnetic, full of charm, with an easy smile and dark eyes that promised adventures and a bright future. He spoke with sweeping passion about grand plans, about building a firm that would change the world. He didn't have money, but he had an ambition I found admirable. I fell in love with that dream, with that potential. I remember one afternoon sitting in a cafe in Silver Lake when I timidly told him about my inheritance. His eyes shone in a way I mistook for shared excitement. "We can do everything, Natalia," he said, taking my hands in his, "together." And I, desperate to believe in together, believed him. I believed that my love and my resources would be the wind beneath his wings. I didn't realize he only wanted the wings to fly away from me. The company occupied an entire wall of my mental museum, filled with press clippings and event photos. I remembered the night I presented him with the business plan for his consulting firm, a 50-page document I had spent weeks researching, writing, and designing. "It's brilliant, honey," he said, kissing me with gratitude I now knew was purely transactional. I used the trust to finance everything: the luxury office with panoramic views in Century City, the salaries of the first employees, the first-class trips to secure clients. Legally, through a holding company that Harold helped me structure, I owned 80% of the shares. It was my safety net, a silent precaution. But to the world, and soon to himself, it was his company. At dinner parties, I would hear him say proudly, "When I founded my company," while I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the supportive, decorative wife. When my own architecture studio began winning national awards, he called it my little hobby. "Glad you're keeping busy, darling," he'd say, patting my hand with condescension. Each word was a small cut, invisible to others, but one that bled profusely inside me. The last and largest exhibition was the house, the masterpiece of my submission. The imposing mansion in Bel Air, every plan, every material, every piece of furniture, I had chosen and paid for it. I spent a year of my life immersed in its design and construction, creating a home that reflected everything I loved: open spaces, natural light, a fusion of modernity and warmth. The day we moved in, Catherine arrived with a retinue of interior decorators. "The house is magnificent, Blake. A true palace for you," she said, walking past me as if I were part of the furniture. "But it needs a feminine touch, a touch of true class." And she proceeded to desecrate my creation. Heavy velvet curtains that blocked the light, uncomfortable but name-brand sofas, pretentious art that replaced the striking contemporary pieces by young artists I had carefully selected. When I tried to protest, my voice trembling with indignation, Blake took me to the library. "Natalia, please don't start a drama. It's just decor. Let my mother have her fun. After all, she feels this house is hers too." That phrase echoed in my head for days, months, years. His house, the house I had dreamed of, paid for, and built. And I didn't even have a voice in choosing the curtains. I was an honored guest in my own life. I mentally walked through each of these exhibits, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pain, that dull ache in my chest. The sadness had evaporated, leaving in its place a cold, crystalline calm. Blake's laugh hadn't been an isolated act, a slip. It had been the culmination, the final piece that completed the mosaic of contempt they had meticulously built around me for 5 long years. My grandfather had given me the tools to build a happy life, and I, blinded by love, had used them to construct a palace for my own jailer. But he had also given me something else, something they never knew I had, the master key to demolish everything. I turned the steering wheel with new determination and drove the car back toward Bel Air. I was no longer driving aimlessly. I had a destination, my home, or rather, my property. And I had to get there before the sun rose. I had to start the demolition. The mansion door opened with a soft electronic click, a sound that had always seemed like a welcome and that now sounded like the bolt of a jail cell opening to free me. I entered the quiet, dark house, a mausoleum of my failed hopes. The air was impregnated with the aroma of orchids Catherine insisted on changing every 3 days, a constant floral reminder of her invasion. My footsteps echoed in the marble foyer, a solitary sound in the immensity I myself had created, and that now felt alien. I did not turn on the main lights. I moved through the shadows, guided by the pale moonlight filtering through the immense windows that overlooked the garden. Everything in that house, every object, every texture screamed their names. The ridiculous, ostentatious Chinese vase in the entryway, Catherine's choice. The enormous oil portrait of Blake presiding over the main living room, a birthday gift he had commissioned for himself, making him look like a 19th century monarch. I walked through the living room, my fingers grazing the surface of the brocade sofas I detested, the cold stone of the fireplace we never lit. This house wasn't a home. It was a stage, and I had been the lead actress in a play about my own irrelevance. I climbed the spiral staircase and went directly to my studio. It was my island, my fortress of solitude, the only space in the entire house that felt truly mine. Blake rarely entered here. He said the smell of drafting paper, wood models, and reheated coffee gave him a headache. To me, it was the smell of work, creation, my identity. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me, and the muffled sound of the outside world brought a sense of relief. I turned on a small desk lamp whose warm, focused light illuminated the blueprints for my latest project, the boutique hotel in Miami Beach. For a moment, I got lost in the clean lines, in the promise of building something beautiful and lasting. But tonight was not for building. It was for destroying. I knelt in front of the built-in shelving unit. My fingers found the spine of a fake volume of architectural works. I pressed an exact spot. A panel of the shelving unit slid silently aside, revealing the keypad of a digital safe. I entered the code. My grandfather's birthday. The heavy steel door opened without a groan. Inside, next to my personal jewelry and some important documents, was a black leather folder with a zipper. I took it out and placed it on my walnut desk. It contained all the trust documents, the holding company bylaws, the property deeds, the financing contracts for Blake's company, the complete arsenal, my freedom bound in leather. I sat in my leather chair and stared at the landline phone on my desk. My heart wasn't pounding. My pulse was steady, metronomic. The woman who had fled that gala, trembling with impotent rage, no longer existed. In her place sat an architect about to execute the most precise and calculated demolition of her career. Before making the call, I opened a side drawer and pulled out our wedding album. The cover was white linen, now slightly yellowed. I opened it to the first page. There we were on a cobblestone street in San Miguel de Allende, smiling at the camera, frozen in a moment of happiness that now seemed like a farce. I remembered the warmth of the sun on my skin, the taste of celebratory champagne, the feel of his strong and supposedly protective hand in mine. I remembered the naive, optimistic young woman who believed that love could conquer everything, that kindness and patience could change people. I didn't feel sadness looking at that photo. What I felt was a strange, distant compassion for that girl. She didn't know what awaited her, but she had survived, and now she was going to reclaim the life that girl deserved. I closed the album with a dry, definitive thud. It was not an act of rage, but a finality. It was the full stop on a badly written chapter. I picked up the phone receiver and dialed Harold's personal number. I knew he would be awake. He never fully slept, always alert like an old guardian watching over his friend's legacy. It rang twice. Natalia? His voice, deep, calm, and familiar, answered without a hint of surprise, as if he had been sitting by the phone waiting for this call for 5 years. "Harold, it's me," I said, my voice as stable as his, a composure that surprised even myself. "I apologize for the hour." "It's never too late for justice, child. That's the first thing your grandfather taught me," he replied. "Are you well?" "I'm better than ever," I responded, and it was the purest, most liberating truth I had spoken in a long time. It's time. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pause of doubt, but of solemnity. I could imagine him in the gloom of his library, surrounded by law books, nodding slowly. "Are you completely sure? Once we start this process, there is no turning back." "Completely," I said, my gaze fixed on the leather folder on my desk. "Activate the legacy protocol." "Understood," Harold said. His tone was not one of celebration, but of resolute professionalism. "First thing in the morning, everything will be underway. The mechanisms are ready. They just needed your authorization. Now do me a favor. Try to get some rest, Natalia. Tomorrow, your new life begins." I hung up the phone. A deep, dense silence filled the studio. I did not feel euphoria. I did not feel revenge. What I felt was an immense, overwhelming, glorious peace. The peace of knowing that for the first time, I was about to tear down the walls of my own prison, and the architect, the engineer, and the demolition team for that operation was myself. The sun was barely beginning to tinge the horizon with pale rose when my car slid into the underground parking garage of the office tower in Century City. At 7 in the morning, the financial district was a slowly awakening giant of glass and steel, a world of ambition and power that had always seemed alien to me. Blake's world. Today, however, I came to claim my part. Harold met me in person in the building lobby. He wasn't wearing his usual three-piece suit, but a comfortable tweed sweater and corduroy trousers, as if preparing for a long day of strategic work, not for impressing anyone. "Coffee is ready and the documents are waiting," was all he said with a half smile that didn't reach his serious eyes. He guided me to the private elevator that went directly to his office on the 40th floor. The views from his office were spectacular, a panorama of the city stretching as far as the eye could see, but my attention was fixed on the large glass conference table. On it, perfectly organized, were 3 ivory-colored folders. Blake's Symphony of Destruction was about to begin, and Harold was its methodical conductor. "Before you sign anything, Natalia," he said, pouring me a cup of hot black coffee, "I want you to understand the power of the instrument you're about to play." He opened the first folder, a bound copy of the trust document. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, a genius in business, but he was also a man who did not blindly trust human nature. He knew money could corrupt. That's why he included a clause that I myself drafted under his strict instructions. We called it, between ourselves, the legacy clause." His index finger, gnarled with age, pointed to a highlighted paragraph. It states, in unequivocal legal language, bulletproof against any appeal, that any secondary beneficiary, in this case Blake, who commits a demonstrable act of public humiliation, emotional abuse, or deliberate dishonor against the principal beneficiary, that is, you, will immediately, automatically, and irrevocably lose all access and rights to the funds and assets derived from the trust. He paused, his wise eyes meeting mine. "Blake's laugh last night wasn't just a rudeness, Natalia. It was a flagrant violation of contract, and we have at least 4 witnesses ready to testify under oath, including Marcus Bennett of Bennett Hospitality Group, who called me this morning at 6. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. My grandfather had not only left me his fortune, he had left me a shield and a sword. Now the execution, Harold continued, his tone becoming more energetic, like a general detailing his battle plan. It's a strategy in 3 simultaneous movements, fast, clean, and legally impregnable. Harold slid a stack of papers in front of me. This is an official certified notification to all banking institutions where the trust holds accounts. With your signature, at 9:01 a.m. sharp, all joint accounts will be frozen. All credit cards in Blake and his mother's names, which are extensions of the corporate account, will be instantly canceled. We stop paying the leases on his and her luxury SUVs. In short, his financial oxygen will be cut off at the root. I took the pen he offered. It felt heavy in my hand. The ink flowed smoothly onto the paper. My signature was firm, without a single tremor. By signing, I felt as if I were closing a valve, stopping the flow of a poison that had been contaminating my life. He opened the second folder containing the bylaws of Montgomery Consultants, Blake's company. As the 80% owner of the shares through your holding company, Chen Investments, you have the absolute power to call an emergency meeting. This document calls for that meeting today at 11 a.m. The single item on the agenda is the immediate removal of the CEO, Blake Montgomery, for loss of confidence by the majority shareholder and potential damage to the company's reputation. Can the other minority partners stop it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Harold smiled for the first time, a genuine smile that lit up his face. The other 20% are minor investors he brought in. Your 80% is a benevolent dictatorship. In this case, it's a completely legal corporate coup d'etat. By the time he receives notification of the meeting, we will have already voted. I have prepared a standard severance offer for him, as required by law. Generous, but final. He won't be able to touch anything else from the company. I signed the second document, feeling a knot in my stomach, a vestige of the woman who had promised to support him in sickness and in health. But this, I reminded myself, was a necessary amputation to save the rest of the body. The third folder was the thinnest, but its content was the most devastating on a personal level. It contained the deed to the Bel Air mansion. The property, as you know, is registered under Chen Investments, Harold explained. Blake has been living there under a usufruct agreement conditioned on your marriage and, crucially, on compliance with the terms of the trust. By violating the legacy clause, his right to inhabit the property is legally nullified. He placed a formal eviction notice drafted by a public notary in front of me. A notary will personally deliver this to him at 10 a.m. The law grants him 48 hours to collect his personal belongings and vacate the property. If he refuses, we will proceed with public force, but I doubt it will come to that. The humiliation would be too great. When my pen slid across the third signature, I knew there was no turning back. The symphony was complete. The instruments were tuned. The orchestra was ready. All that remained was to wait for the curtain to rise on the ruins of Blake's life. And now what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, feeling the weight of what I had just set in motion. Harold closed the folders with almost reverential care. Now, Natalia, you drink your coffee. You go to your studio, turn on your favorite music, and start designing your future. Forget about this. I'll take care of the rest. I left his office just as the city was fully waking up and plunging into its morning chaos. The traffic, the horns, the people rushing, everything seemed strangely orderly, each car in its lane, each stoplight on its time. My life, for the first time in years, felt just as ordered. Every piece was in place, ready for the final checkmate. I was no longer a victim at the mercy of circumstances. I was the strategist, the architect of my own liberation. I arrived home and found the housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, a discreet and hardworking woman who had been with us since we moved in, already at work. She gave me a warm, slightly sad smile. She had the intuition of people who have seen a lot in life. "Good morning, Miss Natalia. Did you sleep well?" I shook my head, but returned her smile. "I'll sleep better today, Mrs. Rivera." She nodded as if she understood everything. I went to the kitchen, made myself some jasmine tea, and sat at the large dining table by the window overlooking the garden I had designed. I watched a hummingbird flutter among the flowers. I waited. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into tense expectation. Blake arrived at 10:15, whistling a tune off-key. He entered the house as if he were the king of a castle, tossing his leather briefcase onto a chair in the foyer. His face showed the satisfied arrogance of someone who believes they have won a battle. He had surely spent the night savoring his triumph, my humiliation, and expected to find me undone, crying in some corner, ready to plead for his forgiveness. "Natalia," he said, his tone a mix of annoyance and paternalistic condescension. "I hope you've gotten over your tantrum. You have to understand that my mother is old school and sometimes you're just too sensitive." He couldn't finish his sermon. The doorbell rang, a clear, authoritative sound that cut the air. Mrs. Rivera went to open it. A middle-aged man in an impeccable suit with a leather portfolio introduced himself as a public notary. "I'm looking for Mr. Blake Montgomery. I need to deliver some official documents to him personally." Blake's expression shifted from arrogance to mild confusion. "For me? From whom?" "Sign here on the acknowledgement of receipt, please," the notary said, ignoring his question with expressionless professionalism. While Blake signed, I watched the scene from the dining room, sipping my tea. I felt a strange calm, the calm that precedes the controlled demolition of a building. You know it's going to be loud and chaotic, but you trust the engineer's calculations. Blake closed the door and tore open the envelope impatiently. I saw his eyes quickly scan the first page. His brow furrowed, then his eyes widened as if cold water had been thrown in his face. He reread it more slowly this time, his lips moving without making a sound, as if he couldn't process the words. "What is this garbage?" he finally spat out, looking up at me. His face had lost all color, taking on a waxy tone. "Eviction notice? 48 hours? You've gone completely crazy." Before I could answer, his cell phone rang with a strident tone. It was a call from his assistant, Sophie. "Blake, what the hell is going on?" The girl's voice sounded hysterical even through the phone. "A notice just came from the board. There's an emergency meeting in half an hour to vote on your removal. It says it's by order of the majority shareholder. Who is the damn majority shareholder? I thought it was you." Blake froze, the phone glued to his ear as if it were a malignant growth. His mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. He looked at the eviction notice in his hand, then looked at me. Understanding began to dawn on his face, not like a gentle sunrise, but like a violent lightning flash, illuminating a landscape of ruins in the darkness. "It was you," he whispered, slowly lowering the phone. "The holding company, Chen Investments. It was yours." "Mine and my grandfather's," I gently corrected, taking another sip of tea. The taste of jasmine had never seemed so sweet. His face contorted into a grimace of disbelief and pure rage. "You can't do this to me. I built that company with my sweat." "You were the facade, Blake," I replied, my voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "I was the foundation, the capital, and the strategy, and the foundation has decided that the building is rotten and must be demolished before it collapses on everyone." His phone rang again. This time he saw the screen, and with a roar of frustration, he hurled it against the wall. The state-of-the-art device shattered into pieces. "American Express, they say my card was canceled." He started pacing back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. "This is your fault. You're trying to destroy me over a stupid comment from my mother." "No, Blake," I said, finally standing up. I placed the cup on the table and walked toward him, stopping at a safe distance. "You destroyed yourself last night. every silent humiliation, every lie, every time you made me feel small to feel bigger yourself, all of that was the bricks of your own ruin. Last night, with your laugh, you didn't just make a comment. You laid the last brick and activated the demolition. He looked at me, his eyes full of a childlike panic I had never seen before. The arrogant man, the king of the castle, had disappeared. In his place was a frightened boy who had just discovered that the world did not revolve around him. "What do you want, Natalia? Money? I'll give you whatever you want. We can fix this," he pleaded, his voice breaking. I shook my head slowly. It's too late for that. What I want, I'm already taking. I want my house. I want my company. I want my life back. I paused and looked him directly in the eyes without blinking. "And I want you out of it." Just then, the front door burst open. Catherine stormed in, her face red and her eyes wild. "Blake, can you explain to me what it means that my credit cards don't work? I just suffered the embarrassment of my life at Neiman Marcus." She saw the suitcases that Blake had started bringing to the foyer. She saw her son's pale, distraught face. And then she saw me standing there, serene and in absolute control. Her fury transformed into jaw-dropped confusion. What in God's name is happening here? Blake, unable to articulate a word, could only point with a trembling finger to the eviction notice that had fallen to the floor. Catherine picked it up, read it, and for the first time in the 5 years I had known her, I saw Catherine Montgomery rendered speechless, her face a mask of pure, absolute horror. The curtain had risen. Reality, in all its crudeness, had made its triumphant entry, and the show had just begun. Catherine's public embarrassment at the luxury boutique was only the prelude. While she and Blake tried to process the magnitude of their fall in the foyer of my house, the rest of their carefully constructed world crumbled around them with breakneck speed. Blake frantically called the other minority partners of the company, pleading, threatening, but it was too late. The emergency board meeting was held via video conference. Harold, representing me, was brief and forceful. The vote was a mere formality. At 11:30 a.m., Blake Montgomery was no longer the CEO of the company that ironically carried his family's name. The news in the small, inbred circle of the city's elite didn't spread like wildfire. It exploded like a supernova. Catherine's phone, which until yesterday rang incessantly with invitations and flatteries, was now deathly silent. Her high society friends, the same ones who had smiled knowingly at my humiliation, now crossed the street if they saw her coming or faked an urgent call to avoid having to greet her. The fall from grace of the Montgomerys became the main topic of conversation in the boardrooms and country clubs of Beverly Hills. I, meanwhile, locked myself in my studio, not to hide, but to work. I turned off my personal phone, ignoring the messages from Blake that swung from pleading to insult. I immersed myself in the blueprints for the Miami Beach Hotel, in the structural calculations, in the color palette. I needed to create, to build something tangible and beautiful on the ashes of my former life. Work was my anchor, my therapy, my declaration of independence. In the middle of the afternoon, my office intercom buzzed. It was my assistant. "Miss Chen, you have a call from Mr. Marcus Bennett of Bennett Hospitality Group. He says it's urgent and personal." Marcus, the man with the kind face and intelligent eyes who had averted his gaze with visible discomfort during the gala scene. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't want to talk to anyone from that world, but something told me to answer. "Natalia, it's great to hear your voice," he said. His tone was warm and genuinely respectful. "I'm calling for 2 reasons. The first and most important is to offer my sincerest and deepest apologies for what my wife and I witnessed last night. It was an act of unspeakable vulgarity. Your elegance and dignity under that pressure were, well, they were remarkable." "Thank you, Marcus. I truly appreciate your words," I replied, surprised and moved by his frankness. "The second reason is business," he continued. "I've been following your work for years. Your studio has an impeccable reputation for creativity and professionalism. We had planned to open a design competition for our next 3 boutique hotels in Palm Springs, Charleston, and the Virgin Islands. But after last night, I spoke with the board of directors this morning." He paused, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "The competition is canceled. We want the project to be yours, exclusively yours. We believe that the integrity of a building begins with the integrity of its architect. If you're interested, of course." I stood in stunned silence, assimilating his words. It was the contract of my dreams, a project that would not only catapult my studio to an international level, but would allow me to do what I loved most. And it arrived on the very same day, almost at the same hour, that Blake's fantasy world was shattering. The irony was so poetic, so precise, it almost made me burst out laughing. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions I felt, "I would be more than interested. I would be honored to accept." "Excellent. My assistant will send you the contract drafts this afternoon. Natalia," he added, his voice turning serious again, "talent and integrity always prevail. Sometimes they take a while, but they always win. Never forget that." I hung up the phone and stared out the window of my studio. Outside in the street, a moving truck was parking in front of the house. It had arrived to take Blake's belongings. At the very moment, my professional future expanded in a way I had never dreamed. His past, his possessions, his entire life was being packed into cardboard boxes. That night, as the truck drove away down the silent street, taking the last vestiges of my life with Blake, Catherine came to see me for the last time. She didn't come in shouting. She was haggard. Her smeared makeup gave her a ghostly appearance, and her designer clothes looked like a costume on a defeated, shrunken body. "We lost everything," she whispered, standing in the now empty foyer. Her voice was a hollow echo. "The name, the respect, everything." "You lost it," I corrected her, my voice devoid of anger, just an exhausted, heavy truth. "I just took back everything that was mine." She looked up, her eyes bloodshot. "And was it worth it? Destroying my son, your husband, for a little bit of wounded pride?" "It wasn't pride, Catherine," I replied, stepping closer to her. "It was respect. Something you two never understood because you believe it's demanded, not earned. And yes," I looked at her intently, letting her see the unbreakable strength in my eyes, "it was worth every damn second." She stood speechless, turned around and left, a shadow of the imposing woman she had been. I watched her get into a taxi, a gesture as alien to her as humility, and disappear into the night. The house was silent again, but this time it was not an oppressive silence. It was a blank canvas, and I finally had all the brushes to paint the life I wanted. A month passed, a month that felt like a century of change. The house, my house, was transformed. Catherine's ostentatious, pretentious furniture was gone, donated to a charity, an act of irony only I appreciated. In its place came pieces that reflected my own style, a blend of warm minimalism, natural woods, hand-woven textiles, and above all, light, lots of light. The ridiculous, enormous portrait of Blake was replaced by a spectacular canvas I won at an auction, a powerful, contemporary, abstract piece by a rising artist. The house was no longer a cold declaration of status. It became a sanctuary, my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe. My work became my passion and my refuge. I plunged fully into Marcus's hotel project, traveling to Palm Springs and Charleston, absorbing the local culture, talking to artisans, translating the essence of each place into spaces that told a story. My team grew. I hired 2 brilliant young architects fresh out of UCLA and an interior designer with exceptional talent. My little hobby, as Blake used to call it, now had 15 employees, new offices in the downtown arts district, and a 6-month client waiting list. One day, among a pile of correspondence, I found a letter. The sender was a law firm I didn't know. The envelope, made of cheap paper, was from Blake. It wasn't a lawsuit, as I half expected. It was a plea, handwritten in trembling script. The letter was a torrent of self-pity and thinly disguised blame. He talked about how he was living in a small, dark apartment in a run-down neighborhood in the valley, how he was unsuccessfully looking for work, how his terrible error of one night had cost him everything. He appealed to the good times that never truly existed, to our love, and ended by asking for my financial help to start over. I read the letter twice, looking for some trace of genuine remorse, of real understanding of his cruelty. I found nothing, only the lament of a man who missed his privileges. I felt no pity. I felt no rage. I felt absolutely nothing. It was like reading the story of a stranger. However, I knew I had to close that chapter forever. Not for him, but for me. I agreed to meet with him. I chose a neutral, bustling coffee shop in Larchmont Village, a crowded but anonymous place where a drama would be inappropriate. He arrived on time, a habit he must have acquired in his new life without a chauffeur. He looked diminished. He wore a suit that was a little too big for him, probably the only decent one he had left. He had lost weight and had deep dark circles under his eyes. The arrogance had been replaced by a nervous anxiety that manifested in the constant drumming of his fingers on the table. "Thanks for coming, Nat," he said, using the nickname I hadn't heard him use in years. "Natalia," I corrected him with a calm that disarmed him. He tried to talk about his difficulties, how unfair everything had been, how his mother was devastated and working as a receptionist in a dental clinic in the suburbs to survive. I listened without interrupting, with the patience of a therapist listening to a patient who refuses to accept their own diagnosis. When he finished, an uncomfortable silence settled between us. "What you did that night, Blake," I began, my voice measured, emotionless, as if I were discussing a blueprint, "wasn't a mistake. A mistake is taking the wrong street or spilling coffee. What you did was a conscious choice. You chose loyalty to your mother's tyranny over loyalty to your wife. You chose your fragile ego over my dignity. And your laugh wasn't a slip. It was your signature on that choice." He lowered his gaze, unable to hold mine. "I know, and I'm truly sorry." "I'm glad you're sorry," I said, "but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Forgiveness is for me to move on, not for you to go back." I pulled an envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. His eyes lit up with a pathetic hope. "Inside here is a check," I continued. "It's for $50,000. I watched him mentally calculate, a mixture of disappointment and relief. "It's not charity. Consider it a final severance pay for the 5 years of my life I invested in a failed project. It's enough for you to start over, perhaps in another city, far from here. But it's not enough for you to forget what it feels like to have to earn your life with your own effort and your own sweat." He stared at the envelope, stunned, as if he didn't know whether to take it or not. I stood up. "I wish you luck, Blake. I truly hope you build something for yourself someday. Something real." I turned around and left without looking back. As I walked along the tree-lined streets of Larchmont under the afternoon sun, I felt a final weight, one I didn't know I was still carrying, detach from my shoulders. It was not the weight of hatred, but the weight of responsibility for him. Now I was free, completely free. The final scene of my story is not dramatic. It is me, 6 months later, on the opening night of the first boutique hotel in Palm Springs. The space is stunning, a magical fusion of modern design and local artistry. I am surrounded by my team, by Marcus and his family, by the local artisans who collaborated on the project. There is jazz music, laughter, the aroma of mesquite-grilled delicacies and fine wine. There is joy. In the middle of the celebration, I step out onto a terrace that overlooks the illuminated desert landscape, the San Jacinto Mountains rising majestically in the distance. I feel the warm breeze on my face, and I smile. It is not a smile of victory or revenge. It is a smile of peace, the deep, satisfying peace of having demolished a false life to build a true one. The peace of being exactly where my grandfather would have wanted me to be, standing on a solid foundation built by myself, finally feeling immensely, gloriously whole. I gave him a second chance, albeit in a different way than he expected. I did the right thing by protecting my grandfather's legacy and my own dignity. But the question remains, did I go too far, or did I do exactly what needed to be done? The answer, I've learned, doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm finally free to build the life I was always meant to live, one where I am the architect of my own destiny, not a guest in someone else's design,